This is Ross Coulthard, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. Andy here with a bonus show to round off the week, or the start of the week, depending on where you're going to listen to this. I have joining me for this one the director of the Experiencer Group, co-host on Witness Citizen podcast with Sean Rash, and co-founder of the Inquire into Anomalous Experiences conferences. And of course, I've got to add in former guest on the podcast, J. Christopher King. Jay, welcome back.
It's so great to be here, Andy. It's so wonderful to see you again.
It's good to get you on to chat about the conference in plenty of time before it kicks off. Jay, just for anyone who hasn't heard you on this podcast or another show before, give us a little bit of your background, because you've done and are doing quite a lot within the UFO topic.
Well, thanks, Andy. And, I was just thinking before we came on here, you were one of the first interviews that I ever did after I kind of came out of the closet. I'd been working for a while in leading support groups for fellow anomalous experiencers. And I'd also been helping doing background research and assisting Richard Dolan, the researcher, with his members site. And actually it was in, I guess it was September of 2021. It feels like forever ago, but it's really not. That Ralph Blumenthal wrote about me, the Experiencer Group, and some of the other members of the Experiencer Group for an article that was originally pitched for the New York Times. It narrowly got rejected from some kind of editorial disagreement, and was eventually published in the Debrief. And that was kind of like my coming out party, and I think we met a few weeks after that. And it had been kind of a dicey period of time for me before that, because I'd already co-founded the Experiencer Group with Stuart Davis and Kirsten Blackburn. And I was kind of navigating this difficult space of being a private, not public figure, not a public experiencer, while facilitating a whole kind of private members community. So the Experiencer Group, for those that don't know, is a private members site dedicated to support curiosity and community for people who've had anomalous events of any and all kinds. So that could be UAP experiencers of non-human intelligence, out-of-body, near-death experiencers, precognition. The list goes on and on. And it's a place. It's a social media site. So there's kind of an activity feed and things like that. And the kind of center locus for the activity is actually Zoom groups that we do very, very frequently. So we've had over 225 events just in the last 2 years alone. Support meetings, book clubs, Ask Me Anything sessions, a regular thing that we do every 2 months called Current Events in Anomalous Culture. The last one that we did was with Exo Academian and Daniel Elizondo, who goes by Omega Point sometimes on Twitter, the co-author of Loose Threads. Before that, we had the wonderful Dan Zetterstrom and Sean Rosh guesting on Current Events in Anomalous Culture, so that members can get together with prominent people in the community to just talk about what's going on, things like that. We also have a dream study group, a group dedicated to experiments and experiences related to the Monroe Institute protocols. So that's kind of out of body astral stuff, things and many, many other kind of situations where people can get together and have an excuse to compare notes with regard to the different kinds of modalities that come into play when we're talking about anomalous experiences.
I regularly get listeners getting in touch with me to say they've had an experience, they don't know where to turn to, they don't know who to talk to, what should they do. And I'm not the guy to talk to for that, but what I tend to do is send them your way and towards the group. But I've never had anyone come back to say they've had a bad experience doing that. So if anyone is listening and feel they're looking for somewhere to reach out to, I can't recommend Jay and the other crew from the Experiencer Group enough. And if you go back into the archives, I've done a series of interviews, Jay, at the time I spoke to you the first time, with other members of the group and some who weren't part of the group, just to talk about those different experiences over the course of a few shows, which is really enlightening and interesting as well. So not something I can ever attest to say I've had, but it's always interesting to hear other people share those experiences. So, Jay, fast forward to now,
Mhm.
yourself and James Iandoli from Engaging the Phenomenon podcast, former guest. James is always good to talk to. We text regularly as well. You've put on now, this is going to be your third conference. Thinking of those first two, what have been some of the highlights for you and some of the kind of the names you've had?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's been amazing. It's crazy to think about again. Our first conference in New York City was in October. Then we had our second in December, and now we're about to have our third in April. The first one, we had Gary Nolan headlining. That was absolutely fantastic. He did I think it was like an 80-minute Ask Me Anything session with people in the audience and online, and that was kind of a surprise. People thought he was going to do a talk, but he was just like, let's just have a conversation. It made for a really, really unique event. Mitch Horowitz was also there. Darren King, who goes by Exo Academian online, he was there. Dr. Tim Grieve Carlson. It was an amazing program, and for the second one, it was really wild. We had Chris Millen headline. He was doing a fireside chat with Leslie Kean. Ralph Blumenthal was also there, and that was actually the first time that Leslie and Ralph had ever done a conference together. So that was a real honor and incredibly unique. We had Jeff Kripal, Whitley Strieber, Sharon Hewitt-Rowlett. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience, and so many great people in the audience. I mean, you could look around and see so many prominent people in the community, like Randy Nickerson. Mitch Horowitz showed up at the second one. Sean Esbjorn Hargens, who's a prominent academic regarding anomalous studies. So many great podcasters. Dan Zetterstrom made it overseas for that one, and he's been over here ever since. I mean, look at that. That was kind of the start of like a great journey for Dan.
Yeah, can't get rid of
So,
him. He's went from Mexico to Colombia, and he's there for the Phenomenology series. And Vinnie Adams is going out there. Graham Rendell, I think, made the second
That's
one as
right.
well, didn't he? Yeah, I remember Graham went out. I was very jealous of those guys, but none of them have 4 children at home to deal with. So, yeah,
Very true.
if I could sell one of those, that would be fantastic. If anyone wants to get in touch to fund a trip over. What have you
Absolutely.
learned, Jay, doing these shows? Because you've done 2, and I've got to be honest, given your background in James's, neither of you were coming from massive, as far as I'm aware, public event organising and, putting all these types of huge deals on and getting guests in from all over. Mistakes must have been made, and what have you kind of learned from those first 2?
That's very true. Yeah, what some people may not know about me is that I actually I have a history of working in television, and so I produced television series, cable series, mainly for the Discovery Channel and its subsidiary networks, for basically the entire length of my 30s, and through producing and writing television, because I was essentially doing a lot of TV, like food TV, adventure TV, reality TV, nature television, a lot of shows that don't you typically credit their writers, because it's essentially non-fictional television, and it's a way to evade kind of like union rules for paying writers. So I was an uncredited writer on many of those shows and a credited producer on many of those shows, which would often mean that I was doing double duty. And so I'd be writing or rewriting an episode with a small table full of people, and at the same time I'd be going over and trying to facilitate shoots. And so that would mean, like, what's the location? What's the permitting for a location? How do we cast this? And many other situations like that actually weirdly fed into what we're doing now with the Inquire Anomalous events. And so I was able to take like a lot of what I learned over about a decade of kind of like hustling shoots into play really quickly, especially ones that are happening like around New York City here, which is famously difficult. You know what I mean? New York City shows up in TV and movies all the time, and because of that, it's one of the most difficult places to shoot in. There's so many permits and insurance considerations, and so
let me just add there, and I hate interrupting, but I will attest that, and it's also so expensive to film in. You will find a lot of movies will fly to Glasgow. They will fly the actors, the sets, and they will make Glasgow city centre in Scotland look like New York, because it's cheaper to do that Transformers, Indiana Jones, World War Z, the new
Batman,
the
I think.
Flash, Batman. Yeah, the Batman
Yeah.
was largely all the horrible looking parts of Gotham were Glasgow and Liverpool, essentially. So yeah, I can attest to that because I noticed like, oh, that's not like a deli shop, that's a Greg's shop in Glasgow. So yeah, it's crazy that it's so much cheaper to fly to a different continent and make the place
Well,
look like New York.
Well, I can also I have some kinship with you then, because in movies like The Joker, for example, not even getting outside of the Batman franchise, but I actually live now in Jersey City. I lived in New York City, which is like right out the window here. I can see the skyline out my window. But I lived over there and mainly in Brooklyn for about 16 years, and I've been over here for about 6 years now. But they use Jersey City as to look like the shite parts in the Joker and films and a lot of the Marvel series and things like that. And so we've got that kinship together
Nice.
between Glasgow and Jersey City. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Any parts
So
you see look like a dive, it's they're there. But yeah, anyway, back to the UFO stuff. Yeah.
yeah, so what have I learned? I mean, there's been a lot that I've learned in terms of like the little BS in terms of how taxes work with live events, and like all these kind of like bizarre little loopholes that you have to kind of manage when dealing with this stuff, and kind of like the finance side of things, which is very, very difficult. And like my hat's off to anybody that works in this space and has to manage the accounts and things like that. And it's something, it's kind of like it's kind of a dirty word when it comes to our profession, or like our field of study, when it comes to anomalous studies,
Yeah.
ufology, anything like that. There's as opposed to almost any other field of inquiry, it's somehow forbidden for people to talk about money or to make money in a situation when they're doing this. And so
Yeah.
apparently, ufology and anomalous studies is only allowed to be done by hobbyists or people that are independently wealthy. And I think that's I think that's frankly crap. I think I would use stronger language, but I know this is going out and like but like along those lines, what else have I learned? There's a lot that I've learned in terms of like cross pollination, and maybe we'll get back to this later. But when James and I come up with like who's going to be speaking at these events, what we've come to from the first one to this one is really like, how can we create like an exciting environment for the speakers themselves, and so that people that are watching can actually kind of see and experience what happens when prominent thinkers in slightly different fields get together and learn from each other. And we can get to that when we talk about the speakers for this one. But that's been one thing that I think that has been like a really like a big point of growth between October and now, for sure.
Well, just before we get to the speakers list and what they're going to be bringing, I mentioned to you before we recorded I had like a negative to bring up, and I never told you what it was. I'd like to hear your honest answer. So I saw a
Sure.
comment from someone when I was promoting the event for you. I'm happy to retweet things for friends, colleagues, and people like yourself who are putting stuff on that is going to be beneficial to people who want to take part, join in, and all that kind of stuff. And it's a big undertaking for yourself and James and anyone who's doing it, including I'll mention now Kelly Chase from UFO Rabbit Hole podcast is putting on an event similar to yourself in terms of it being smaller scale. It's not a big expo, it's not a big conference hall. It's at Wright Patterson. That's in July. Is that right? Am I getting that correct?
Actually, it's in May.
May. Ah, okay. So
Early
there
May.
you go. Even sooner.
Right around the
But
corner.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going to be like retweeting that for her as well, and I think there's
Oh,
going to
that's
be a
very sweet.
competition for free tickets and stuff as well. But that'll come out soon. But
Excellent.
these events remind me of concerts that people go to. I saw someone comment saying that when you turn up to one of these events, if you've heard the person on a podcast or do an interview, there's no point in going because you hear the same stuff over and over and over again. And for me, it's a little bit like going to see Adele. Everyone knows Adele, the international
Sure.
superstar. People go to stadiums, 100,000 crowds to watch Adele sing. However, the shows that people really remember are the smaller, more intimate venues. If you get a chance to go to like a Las Vegas residency, if you get a chance
Hmm.
to go to the Royal Albert Hall or some real
Hmm.
small intimate venue, you're closer. There's a couple of hundred of you in the room. They're singing to you, they're talking to you, they're making eye contact. And I think you see celebrities like that on those stages, they open up more in a way they don't in front of a bigger crowd. Not that you don't enjoy those bigger performances, but those intimate venues, I think, bring something completely different to those conversations. And what do you think about that?
I completely agree. Like the events that we've put on, we've never had a room that had up till this point that has more than 100 and a capacity for more than 144 people. And so it does create an enormous amount of intimacy. You can approach many of these speakers between talks. There's it's crazy because like each time James and I have to kind of like cat herd a lot between like at the ends of these kind of segue segments, because people are getting up and they're talking to people like Chris Mellon or Ralph or Whitley and things like that. And that is amazing to have that kind of interpersonal experience. But then there's also situations where you know so we're developing a bit of a reputation, and in a way it's very good because folks like Leslie, for example, are bringing kind of new research to their talks as well. And so she did a great job of kind of being a little bit quiet about it, and then once she got on the stage at our last conference, she revealed that she had been researching the Varginha Brazil case for quite a while in massive depth. The same case that James Fox, of course, documented in Moment of Contact.
Mm.
And so she was showing all sorts of records. She was showing all sorts of history, and really showing that she had been digging into that case herself. And for those that were present, I think that it was a bit of a jaw-dropping moment. And for those attending online, it was a bit of a jaw-dropping moment, and seeing like, oh gosh, New York, this person that's written so prominently for the New York Times and things like this is dealing with like a crash retrieval case that involves beings and things like this. And so, it's not the only situation where something like that has happened with our conferences thus far. And that's something that we look forward to continuing, both in the event in April and in future events as well.
Well, I know people at the last one also got to see some advanced sneak preview of Leslie's documentary series that has since aired over in the US as well, still to come out in the UK. So again, like you say, that kind of personal, intimate touch is something that if you're attending is fantastic, but also people get to view it online as well, just to remind you folks that if you're listening to this and think, I'd love to get to New York, but can't make it, then there are limited, and it is, I'm not just saying limited, but there's actually 50,000. There are limited live stream tickets available to 500.
That's right,
That's, yeah.
500. Yeah, there's 500 live stream tickets, and for this next one, there's only 100 total tickets for the in-person. And right now, there's 5. There are 5 in-person tickets left right now. So whoever's listening right now to that UFO podcast when this airs, get on it as soon as possible if you'd like to make it. And those 500 live streams will likely go as well. I mean, the sooner you get to those, the better. We want to ensure a quality experience, and sometimes you'll get on a live cast or something like that, and the chat is just that it's impossible to engage. It's impossible to really kind of get involved or feel heard in some of these situations because so many people are in the chat. And we really wanted to make a situation where we were sure that people could participate. And so we're creating more time between speakers for Q&A segments, more and more each time, so that people that are attending online can participate in the Q&As as well. And we're making sure that we have kind of like the tech available and the hands on deck available to make sure that their questions and their viewpoints are heard both in the room and to the speakers involved as well. So
Well,
it's going to be a pretty unique experience.
tickets have been on sale now for a couple of weeks for the event. That's why there's only 5 left of the in-person tickets, and also there's not 500 left of the live stream tickets. Put it that way.
That's
The
right.
the event takes place on Saturday, the 8th of April, from 11:30 a.m. That's Eastern time, 7:30 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern time.
That's right.
Let's talk about some of the guests then you've got at this one.
Oh, sure.
I'll let you take your pick first, and I'll be honest, there's a couple of guests that I'm not too familiar with, but there's a fantastic spread of guests across this as well. I don't think you could look at any two and go, well, those both do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so in part, one thing that is kind of an underlying theme that is taking place with this event in April is that in part we're celebrating Leslie's new show, the new show that's premiered on National Geographic here in the States. It's also on Hulu and will be showing up on Disney Plus if it hasn't already. UFOs investigating the unknown, and we actually have 4 speakers. That were featured talking heads on that show that are going to be showing up in April. One of those is Derek Pitts. Now, a lot of people haven't, in our space, in Anomalous Study, will have not heard of Derek Pitts. But Derek Pitts, he's the chief astronomer and director of the Fells Planetarium at the Franklin Institute. And this is going to be kind of his first talk, his first lecture within the Anomalous Studies space. After having appeared in that show. Notably, Derek used to be a skeptic, and he's prominently featured on news channels here in the States. And for example, back when the Chicago O'Hare incident happened, where there was a mass UFO sighting above O'Hare Airport, he was brought on to many cable networks at the time to say, like, oh, it's probably just a trick of an atmospheric trick and things like that. Later after that happened, he read Leslie's book, UFOs, Pilots, Generals, Government Officials Go on the Record, and it totally shifted his paradigm. And he became a proponent of really looking at at UAP issues from a scientific perspective. And so since then, he's carried on a dialogue with her and with other people in the field privately, and is now kind of coming out of the shadows as somebody who is another a prominent astronomer like Avi Loeb, who's really interested and dedicated to these issues now. So though people may not have heard of him, it'll be exciting to hear such a great science communicator showing up to our event and kind of coming out as somebody that's interested in these issues as well. We also have Ryan Graves. Of course, so many people in the space will know Ryan, partially from Leslie and Ralph's series of articles that kind of exposed him to the public and via the New York Times years ago. He's also, the host of the new podcast Merged, which prominently features other aircraft pilots and people involved in aviation in dealing with UAP issues. Ryan was the first active duty person to come forward publicly about regular sightings of UAP off the East Coast. So, and Ryan doesn't do many conferences either. So it's another opportunity to rub elbows and hang out and be around for people that don't normally show up to every expo and convention or conference that happens in this space.
And Ryan Graves is probably the most handsome man in podcasting at the moment. So if anyone hasn't seen me and wants to know what I look like, just imagine Ryan Graves, just slightly less muscular. But yeah, he's done really well, and he's been a prominent talking head in many a documentary since 2017 really onwards as well. And he's kind of come into his own talking to, like you say, fellow pilots, scientists, and others. So that's a real catch for you, because he speaks really well. And I joke about how handsome he is, but he's very aesthetically pleasing on the eye for a TV network. So this is why he does the rounds on Fox, CNN, ABC, NBC, because he looks the part, but he also talks the part. He's very highly qualified, and he speaks very well on the topic. So he's a very good advocate, I think, for the subject, and a really good get for the conference too.
Oh, yeah. I'm really looking forward to having them there. It's going to be awesome. And just my interactions with him thus far have been fantastic. He's a great guy, and I really look forward to having them there.
And on that, I'll introduce the next one for you, because speaking of Ryan Graves being a handsome man, James Fox looks eerily like my dad, and I'm not joking. So every time I interview James, I had to say to him once that you're just very, very similar to how my dad looks, and it's eerie. So looking at his picture just now, which is slightly shrunk on my screen, it's like my dad's kind of looking at me. Very odd one, folks. But yeah, sorry, carry on. James Fox, very serious director and producer, of course.
Oh, absolutely, and we're honored because James shows up to conferences and events sometimes, but he has actually been filming recently, and so he's actually going to be kind of taking a break from filming to join us, which will be awesome. And one thing that's going to be unique about James's time is that he's actually going to be doing, like last time we had a fireside chat, a dialogue between Leslie and Christopher Mellon, which was a really unique experience. And for this one, we're going to have Leslie and James Fox together. And considering they both have been privately and publicly working the Varginha case and other prominent cases that may come into play that day, it'll be a really unique situation to watch the two of them have a back and forth and involve the audience in the situation there. But for those, I'm sure most of your audience know, but James Fox has done prominent TV projects for Discovery, Sci-Fi, National Geographic, History Channel. He's got his films The Phenomenon, which is huge, which landed him on Joe Rogan and other places, including your podcast. Moment of Contact, I Know What I Saw, Out of the Blue. He was an incredibly precocious kid, assisting his father, who is also a journalist and investigator. A lot of people don't know this, but James Fox's dad was actually a journalist and also a paraplegic, and so James's dad needed assistance in doing his investigations and doing his interviews, and that's kind of how James did the on the job training that got him to where he is today.
Do you know what I love about James? And I hope he appreciates where this comes from when I say it, and I'm sure he will. Of all the people you interview, most of the time people get frustrated that they won't leave their standard narrative or line of questioning. I always get the impression that James, in the right mood and with the right questions, always likes to push the envelope a little bit of what he knows or what he thinks. And someone like Leslie talking to him in that kind of intimate setting, maybe it's a bit later in the day, couple of whiskeys or scotches down. The James, I think, has got the potential to loosen his tongue a little bit on some of the things he talks about. So that's one I would look forward to.
Absolutely. And again, he's going to be answering questions. And so anybody attending online or in person, just a reminder, please attend and bring your A game, bring your best questions, because James Fox is going to be there to answer them, as well as Leslie.
Absolutely. And next up, Elizabeth Crone.
Yes, and this is another person, Elizabeth, who many people in our space may not know, but this is one thing that's unique about what James and I are trying to do, which is really putting people out there that are really helpful people for the conversation. And Elizabeth Crone is a near-death experiencer. She was struck by lightning and almost died in a parking lot, and she had a very wild, paradigm shifting experience for her worldview during that experience and afterwards. And eventually she met Jeff Kripal. And Jeff Kripal, of course, of Rice University fame, of Archives of the Impossible fame, a unstated but very active member of the Invisible College, if it's still invisible anymore. And Elizabeth, it turned out, after she was struck by lightning, she started having precognitive experiences, precognitive dreams, including situations of airplane crashes. And so, a lot of people, sometimes they write these things in their dream journals or whatever, and it's not verifiable. However, Elizabeth had the forethought to actually email herself these precognitive dreams and precognitive visions, and so she actually had like a time and date stamp on what she was seeing. And so there are a couple prominent plane crashes, including the famous Sully wreck, where a plane had to kind of crash land into a river right here in New York City. She foresaw that and emailed it to herself the day before the wreck actually happened. And so there have been researchers since that have like looked at her email records and looked at her history in dealing with precognitive experiences. And unlike a lot of situations, there is definitely a track record there. And so she co-wrote a wonderful book called Change in a Flash with Jeff Kripal, which speaks a lot to the validity of her case and kind of how serious some people in the community take her experience. And it opens up a lot of questions, like what's a near-death experience? Like how does our brain chemistry or how do our bodies change when extreme events happen, traumatic events, or even just having that load of electricity go through you? Does it fundamentally change something about people's perceptions? And there aren't a lot of great answers to these questions yet, but we have to start asking these bigger questions to get anywhere in this field, I think.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting. And Elizabeth's story, similar to others from Leslie Kean's Surviving Death, and it's not normally a subject or topic I was too interested in because I get a little bit scared of all that kind of stuff. Not that I don't believe
Sure.
it, but the afterlife and ghosts has always been something since a kid. It's kind of inbuilt to be scared of it. And hearing some of the stories of folks that Leslie's interviewed and spoken to of how they've come back from what they've came back from is just incredible. So yeah, that'll be a really interesting one. Next up, is it Daniel Ingram?
That's right, Dr. Daniel Ingram. Now, Dr. Daniel Ingram, he's an incredible figure. First of all, he's an MD. He was a trauma physician, doing emergency medicine for many years. He also has a master's in public health on top of having his MD. He's also now the chief organizer and co-founder of what's called the EPRC, the Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium. And so he's been getting together with medical professionals and scientists to help look at and validate situations of the biological effects that happen for experiencers within different modalities. And this could be like a situation of a UAP, it could be situations of out of body, anything and everything along those lines. And so basically, they're looking at ways that they can kind of help define some of these situations, or at least promote dialogue in the medical community, and start to move with the goal of having a lot of these biological effects codified into medical language and even be able to make it into medical codes so that they can be officially billed for insurance purposes. And so it seems like kind of a strange route to go in some ways, but many people know about the kind of healthcare emergency that we deal with in the United States, where we don't have the kind of nationalized healthcare systems that so many other countries do. And so if things aren't billable by insurance companies, they're ignored. Essentially, they don't exist as conditions because doctors can't make money from them. The list goes on and on for the reasons why it's necessary for the biological effects that and there are many experiencers that come away with chronic health conditions that seem to have differences possibly in the gray matter in their brains, all sorts of situations like this. And so Daniel's doing really important work that way. Also, he's a prominent figure within meditation practice. He's written several books he's a practicing Buddhist himself, and is very well known in that space. And so it'll be great to kind of to have him join, to both be speaking from a very grounded medical perspective with regard to the effects of experiencers, and also looking at it from somebody that many people in our field might think of as kind of like a woo category. Somebody with meditation background that really is kind of interested in the spiritual space. He marries those two things in a way that I think that I and James thinks necessary to kind of bring into the conversation.
No, that's a really interesting crossover in terms of just himself. If you've got this range of guests, this is one guest almost with two, really serious medical professional, but has that spiritual side, that connection, meditation, and merging those two together.
Really
I'm
cool.
not going to lie. This next guest, Jay, and I'll give you a bit of a hint here. I would love to speak to for the podcast. It's Mr. Peter Lavenda. He is the co-author of the Secret Machine series, Gods, Man, and War. That's someone I would love to speak to on the podcast. If only I knew someone who knew him. What's Peter going to bring, Jay, to the event?
Oh, Peter is such an amazing figure. I mean, I love Peter's work. He's so unique in the field. And again, like some of these other folks, he doesn't show up to conferences. He'll barely show up to a podcast.
Yeah.
And so having him actually agree to come up felt like a huge win for James and I. It's a really big deal. It's partially because Peter actually grew up in New York City, and so it was a little bit of a lure to get him back here. But we're so excited. Peter, he wrote these Gods, Man and War, Secret Machines books with Tom DeLonge, of course, and Gods and Men have come out, and there have been kind of rumblings from Tom and Peter that War will be published soon. And so this is going to be a rare situation where maybe we'll be able to hear a little bit of a preview from Peter with regard to the kind of topics and maybe some of the work itself that will come out later in War. We'll see. But he brings such an amazing historical perspective because he doesn't just look at the field of ufology and anomalous studies in general, but for those that have read the Secret Machines books, you'll know that he has a strong history and the mystery schools. What's often thought of as Gnostic thought, and so he brings a kind of interesting marriage of like what have been kind of like the forbidden ideas over many years, and like how do those complement, how do those each other, how do those work with each other, and why are people in power so interested in them, throughout the years. And so I think that he'll bring a very unique perspective, a unique historical perspective to the situation. And again, it may help cross pollinate with some of these other speakers that may not be used to hearing perspectives like that.
Absolutely. And I think anyone who works alongside Tom DeLonge so closely, it's always nice to hear a little bit about Tom DeLonge from other people's perspectives. Jim Semivan recently on the podcast was similar to that. So, and coming soon from Tom DeLonge with the number of projects he has on his desk, the Blink-182 reunion, the tour coming up, the Monsters in California potentially coming out soon, which how soon is now, to quote a famous Morrissey lyric. That's one I look forward to. And finally, Leslie Kean, we've touched on, is going to be hosting that chat with James Fox.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's such an honor and such a pleasure to know Leslie and to have her involved. After she came to the first event and just watched, the Gary Nolan conference, and then she played such an integral role in the second conference with the fireside chat with Christopher Mellon. That now, it's hard to imagine having an event here without her around. She's become such a central figure to these events, and she's such a central figure in kind of the social aspects of New York and anomalous studies and ufology, right? So, what can I say about her? The show recently, Surviving Death, UFOs Investigating the Unknown, the series of articles for the New York Times. She's really one of our greatest living figures in the field, and for what she's done in terms of exposing things like ATIP, the Gimbal Go Fast videos, bringing people like Chris Mellon and Lou Elizondo and Ryan Graves to the general public at large. It's hard to overstate what she's really done for the field, going all the way back to the Boston Globe and the Cometa Report back in the 90s. So it's always a pleasure to have her there, and it's an amazing thing that we get to learn from Leslie. Really, the public that comes to these, other speakers, and for James and I, it's a real gift to the community for sure. I love Leslie.
Just as we start to close out, I want to ask now, you must have had, yourself and James, private conversations with past guests at these conferences, and I'm not one that's going to ask you to name names and what was said, but if you're comfortable, feel free to name names, what Chris Mellon may have said, what he thinks is going on. But what what are those conversations like? And I wonder, from a private point of view, how are those guests giving you an indication how they think things are playing out? The UFO conversation, you're talking to Gary Nolan, Leslie Kean, Ralph Blumenthal, Chris Mellon, and anyone else at those conferences. How are you packaging all that together? What's being said as to how things are going for the UFO conversation?
It's an incredibly exciting time. I mean, from what I know and from what I hear from the people that you just mentioned and others, it's in organizing these events. You're absolutely right that it's really put me and James in a very unique position in terms of the kind of information that we hear. I was used to that to a degree before with the experiencer group and some of the people that flowed through that community as well. But it's just taken off even more in an expanded way with these conferences. And it's impossible to ignore that there are so many groups, individuals, and factions that have so many kind of secret plays happening right now, like towards like what's happening this year, this spring, this summer, this fall. And from what I hear, if any two of these situations go down the way that they're planned, it's going to be a real paradigm shift for the public conversation, and there's the possibility for a lot more. So it's interesting because, as opposed to say 5 or 10 years ago, I do understand some of the secrecy from the researcher's perspective, from the inside of the researcher's perspective, from inside of our community. A lot of people, they get frustrated because online they'll not get an answer from the Pentagon or something like that, the DoD or whatever, and then they'll go to somebody like Ralph Blumenthal or whatever and ask him, and maybe not, and get more of an answer, but there'll be a point where things start to go vague, or where he doesn't want to speak on the record or something like that. And that's completely understandable. The more that I'm involved in with these situations and speaking with these people relatively frequently, it's kind of like a football game. And you don't ask like a football coach before the Super Bowl, like, so what are the plays that you're going to be doing, in a couple hours here, like, because the other side listens. There are a lot of people that want to block the progress that's been happening these last 5 years, 5.5 years almost, since the December 2017 New York Times article. That was a big game changer, and ever since then, it's like we've been playing a different game than before, and a lot of people want to make sure that they keep their plays kind of on the quiet, on the DL, and until some of these situations come to light. Yeah, it's an exciting time though. There are there are people that are going to be going public over the course of the next months. There are all sorts of wild situations, possibly in DC, possibly in New York, that are going to be coming up, and it's. I think that 2023, like, no BS, like I kind of hate it when people talk like this, but I really think that this is going to be the biggest paradigm shift year since 2017 for this field.
If
100%.
I clip that one part of you saying that and put it online, the hate you would get would be incredible, and you know it too. But I think that's without the context behind it. But listen, that's a nice place to round off. How can folks, Jay, get a hold of tickets? Those kind of final tickets remaining.
Oh, sure, absolutely. So tickets are still available. Again, we only have about a handful for in person, and we have a total of 500 for the online live stream version of the conference. Those are available at an inquiry2023.rsvpify.com. And I'm sure we'll put that in the comments and the show notes as well.
Yeah.
Again, that's an inquiry2023.rsvpify.com. And the name of it is An Inquiry into Anomalous Experiences and the Phenomenon. You can also look for it that way.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to know how to find me on Twitter or anything like that too? Are you good?
Nah, not yet. Go for it. Yeah, those will be in the description as well. But for those who don't like looking at the show descriptions, on you go.
Sure. Yeah. Well, if you'd like to look for more about these events on Twitter or anywhere else, you can search for Inquire Anomalous. That's the name of the conference series. And also feel free to look at the experiencer group if you're interested. If you're an experiencer yourself and you'd like to find others out there that might have had similar experiences to you, or you'd like to compare notes. The Experiencer group you can find at tegmembers.com. You can also find it at forexperiencers.com or at FOR Experiencers on Twitter as well.
Well, Jay, best of luck to yourself and James for the third in this series of conferences, which is ongoing. Maybe I'll get to that next one. You never know. And I'll see folks in the live chat on the night.
Well, thank you, Andy. It's been so great to see you today. And yeah, gosh darn it, I'm going to see you in person one of these days. And it's going to be amazing when I do.
That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/That UFO podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFOUAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little grass. Meditative game of state full on meta. Can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. Like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. I jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. And I called out to my boys. They thought this was noise. They thought it was a dream. They thought it was my toys. They thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy, and I don't know what to do because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think I'd be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, Jay? If we're being serious, open your mind, consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life, consider your eyes. It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer. It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer.